of all, before we get going, hello? I've got a few announcements before we get going this morning, and they're all involving chamber functions, and the chamber is going to be very busy in the next month and a half. This afternoon, or at lunchtime today at 11:45, we have Fred Barucci here this morning, president of the BC and Yukon Hotel Association. Excuse me, he'll be speaking here at 11:45. On April 16th, at the St. Joseph School, we have the Citizen of the Year Award being presented, and that's an activity that the Chamber helps work with and set up, and it's very important to the community that we recognize our volunteers. And on Thursday, April 21st, we're meeting with delegates from the Spokane Chamber of Commerce. At a luncheon on April 26th, we are meeting with Dean Cooper, the president of the BC Chamber of Commerce, at the Savoye Inn. On May the 10th, we're meeting with Bill McCourt from the, a luncheon with the commander of the Canadian Forces of Esquimalt. That's also happening in May. Anyhow, this morning I have the honor to preside over this meeting, and I'd like to bring to you Jim Gouk, who is the Reform MP for Kootenay West-Revelstoke. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for coming out early in the morning. I'm sure many people can find other things maybe more beneficial than listening to a politician to do, like sleeping. But we're going to try and present you with some information that you might not otherwise get. But first, before I get going with regards to my guest here in the riding, I'd like to mention just quickly about the electoral boundary revisions that are happening in the West Kootenays. The proposal in this riding would effectively see this riding vanish and be absorbed into other ridings. And what it means locally is it means that Nelson and Castlegar would remain together with the Slocan Valley, but we'd be represented out of the East Kootenays in the new riding of Kootenay. And down the road in Trail, Rosslyn, Fruitvale, Warfield, they would no longer be a part of this same riding where we have so many common considerations, common problems, the geography and everything else, our transportation, all the things that really matter to us here right now. They would be represented by the riding of Okanagan Boundary out of Penticton. So if there's a local problem, which invariably involves all the local towns here, you would have to get an MP from Cranbrook and an MP from Penticton to come here at the same time, quite potentially from two different parties at some point in time, and try and resolve a local issue that way. And I would suggest that that's going to be rather devastating for the West Kootenays. They have yet another problem up in Revelstoke. They join in with the riding of Okanagan-Columbia, as it'll then be called, centering out of Vernon, but going up through Revelstoke, right through the Rogers Pass, all the way to the Alberta border, down to Invermere and Canal Flats. And I guarantee you that will be a very difficult riding to realistically represent properly. There are alternatives. I plan personally to file an intervention and go and speak against this revision. And anyone that is interested in doing so, and it is important that people speak out if they're not in favor of this, you have to file in writing your intention to come to that public hearing and speak against this revision by May the 5th. It has to be received in Victoria, and the public hearing is here in Nelson on May the 20th. So if you phone my office in Castlegar, they'll provide you with all the information, where you have to write, what you have to say, and addresses and everything else. So feel free to call us at any time, and we'll be happy to provide that information for you. At some time in the future, I'll maybe get a chance to come back and tell you sort of the state of state of affairs in Ottawa, what I've been doing. There is a householder that you should now be just receiving about now. Some of you already may have it, and others sometime this week you will likely get it. It'll bring you up to date on some of the things I've been doing, some of the things that are going on in Ottawa. And I'm sure we'll set something up perhaps in May that I can come back and explain it to you a bit longer, but we're a little more limited in our time today, and we have something very unique here. I have asked a member of the Bloc Quebecois to come to this riding for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think that the Quebec issue is certainly at least the second most important thing that is going to occur during this Parliament. The most important thing I still maintain is the budget deficit and all the things that pertain to it. Unlike some of the other parties, I'd suggest that the deficit, the budget, the debt, unemployment, and all those other things are all interconnected. And you can't say what's more important, the employment problem or all these other issues, because they're all one and the same. You can't solve one without dealing with the other. But aside from that, we have the Quebec issue, and that is coming to a head during this term of office. And what you will hear, and in many times past, is you will hear reports through the media. And they will tell you some little segment that they've picked up, or depending on which media it is that's reporting, they will tell you about something that they find rather sensational, and it sparks a big headline. I think that it's appropriate for the people of this riding. They have a right to hear directly from a person involved in the party that has the majority of the seats from Quebec, whose primary mandate is the separation of Quebec, exactly where they're coming from. Not rumors, not just stilted portions that are reported, but the actual details from a person involved in this process. So that is my purpose in having Pierre come here today. I am not bringing him here so that he has a platform in order to get you to jump on the bandwagon. I'm not bringing him here because I'm in support of what he's doing. I'm doing it simply as a facilitator to provide information to the people of this riding so they have some understanding as what is going on in Quebec. In fact, Pierre and I have found some similarities, and you may hear some today, and you will also hear some places where, at best, we have agreed to disagree. In essence, we agree what the problem is, we completely disagree on what the solution is. But Pierre will go into that in a few moments. So my guest here today, and traveling around the riding with me, we're doing 5 meetings, actually 6 if you count an open line radio show, in 3 days. Pierre arrived here yesterday at 12:15, and this is our 4th meeting. So my guest is Pierre de Savoye. Pierre was born in Montreal, and he's been a resident of St. Catharines de la Jacques-Cartier since 1984. They really like these short names in Quebec. He holds a diploma in computer science. He has a Bachelor of Education degree, teacher's certificate in administration, and up until the time of the federal election, he was pursuing his master's degree in business administration at Laval. Pierre has a great deal of experience in instructing computer science at the university level and also in international business consulting. Since 1987, Pierre has ran his own international consulting firm while still maintaining a half-teaching load in computer sciences at university. Pierre has been very active in municipal politics, professional associations, and also the Scout movement. Pierre's involvement with Quebec independence started back in the early 1960s. In October of 1993, Pierre was elected as the Bloc Quebecois Member of Parliament for the riding of Portneuf. Today, Pierre is going to explain to you why Quebec wants its independence and why he believes that we should generally be in support of their quest for this. Now, I've used my position in Ottawa. Some of you maybe watch the parliamentary channels, and you may have heard me speaking on this. I've used my position to speak of the beauty of this riding and the hospitality of the people here. I expect that many of you will have views that differ with those of our guest. As I said, I do myself. Feel free to discuss your opinions and to make your comments, pro or con, to him. But please help me project the image of hospitality that I work so hard to project in Ottawa. So please join me in welcoming my guest, Pierre de Savoye.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in British Columbia, here in Nelson this morning to meet very hospitable people who have woke up maybe earlier this morning to come here and get some information. And here is my first point. I'm not here to convince you or to gather your support. I'm here to convey information, to answer your question as honestly and candidly as I can. Your own wisdom will serve you as a guide to how you will react to what I say. And don't hesitate to ask any type of question. Be sure I won't take it personally, of course. Now, what about Quebec? What is going on in Quebec? Well, this is not a new issue. This is not a new story. Those of you who read the papers in 1980 remember there was a first referendum at that time. But we could go back in time decades and even centuries. And at the very beginning, something like 3 centuries ago, French people from France came over onto this continent, where there were already aboriginals that were living here. And they explored all the continent, to the Rockies and the Pacific, to the Gulf of Mexico, and you have still traces of that with certain names, French names in the States, like Lafayette, or Bâton Rouge, or Cœur d'Alaine, or La Louisiane. But French from France and English people from England waged a war, what they call the 100 Years' War, and eventually they settled the borders here in North America. And our friends were with the British until the Boston Tea Party thing, and on our side we were calmer, and we had the Upper and the Higher Canada, Upper Canada and Lower Canada. And eventually the Confederation was born, and you joined in a little bit later with a railroad promise, and Newfoundland, which never had any railroad, joined in 1949. But meanwhile, what about Quebec? Well, last century, well, I wasn't there personally, you understand, but we experienced a revolt by a group called the Patriots who wanted to push the British out. But they weren't successful, as was Louis Riel here in the West. More recently, you had Duplessis in the 40s and the 50s, who worked very, very hard for the autonomy of province of Quebec. At that time, we had put into place our own facilities to collect income tax in the province of Quebec. We're the only province to do that. You pay your income tax to the province through Ottawa. Ottawa collects it, gives it back to the province, right? Not so in Quebec. We have our own facilities since decades. Mr. Lesage, a good liberal in the 1960 election, got elected on one simple motto: master in our place. We were in the 60s. In the 70s, you had Robert Bourassa, which in his own way, with the hydropower, tried to give a strong economic base on the hydro side to Quebec. Then Mr. Lévesque in 1976 was elected on a platform that was not at that time sovereignty, but good public administration. And he did a great deal in that, to that effect. In 1980, there came the question, and the question was not really clear. I ate it myself. But it didn't gather sufficient support, and at that time, my reflection was, well, this will be put aside for a long, long time, probably one generation. And matter of fact, that is exactly what has happened, since we are now back to that issue, one generation, a generation between being something like 15 years, one generation further down the road. Mr. Bourassa in '84 came back to power and again tried to gain for Quebec a certain number of powers we feel necessary to fully realize the potential we have. Now there's nothing worse, even for an individual or a community, to feel you're deprived from realizing your own potential because of some outsider forces, however well-intended they are. So Mr. Bourassa, through the Meech Lake Accord, tried to negotiate something that would be satisfactory to Quebec. And he barely made it so, but at that point in time, the Meech Lake Accord crumbled because one person decided that was not the type of accord he wanted the Canada to adopt. I'm not passing a judgment. That person has its own reason, which I do respect. But the fact is, it didn't turn out to work. Then, more recently, the Charlottetown Accords. And for two entirely different reasons, Canadians rejected the Charlottetown Accord. On the Quebec side, because it was not enough. And for the rest of Canada, because it was too much. So we agreed on the conclusion, but from two different, entirely opposite point of views. And now the situation in Quebec is the following. The people really want our province to prosper. And mind you, we are not a have-not province. We're not a have province, and not entirely of our fault. May I point out to you that Quebecers are paying to Ottawa, year after year, 28 billion in taxes. And we're receiving from Ottawa 28 billion in services, transfer payments, equalization payments, name it. So we're receiving what we're giving. Not a penny more, not a penny less. Where's the problem? The problem is much of this money comes as UI, 7 billion of it. Not of our choice. We would rather be like some other provinces, namely Ontario, and receive that money in federal government contracts and have the people work for their money rather than having the money given to them. So we're giving 28 billions of good money and receiving 28 billions of not so good money. We would like to keep our 28 billions and use it to have our people work, not to have our people paid for doing nothing, or some of our people paid for doing nothing. Let's look at another economical point of view with an educational slant in it. You know that when people are on UI, they are entitled to receive training. But training is paid by Ottawa through UI subsidies, and the education itself is organized by the province because educational things are of a provincial concern. In province of Quebec, it's the same, except for one thing. Province of Quebec has its own priorities, which are sometimes, not to say oftentimes, different from the coast-to-coast priorities decided by Ottawa, on whatever ground they seem to think it would be worthwhile to do that. So you have this kind of negotiating between province of Quebec and Ottawa on what are the courses that should be taught. And since they disagree, the courses don't start. What are the consequences of that? Since last summer, we have 25,000 people ready to receive training. They are at the door, they are entitled to that benefit, they want to be trained, and they're able to be retrained. But there's no agreement between Ottawa and Quebec. So these people stay at the door, and eventually their benefits end, and they have not been retrained, and they will receive nothing. That is the kind of situation we are experiencing, and we don't think it is fair. During the Charlottetown, prior to the Charlottetown Accord, and during the Charlottetown negotiation, Quebec put into place, in good faith, with a promise from the Mulroney government, put into place a system to manage all the people power things. Whether it was UI would be taken care of by Quebec, whether it was the training issue would be taken care of by Quebec, whatever was involved in employment would be taken care of by this new entity that was called Société Québécoise de développement de la main-d'œuvre, People Power Development Society of Quebec. It's an empty shell. Since the accord was rejected, I remember Mr. Valcourt. He just teared away the thing and said, you said no to Charlottetown, we don't go ahead with this. And we still have those 25,000 persons waiting for nothing. We think it is unfair. So basically, We are at crossroads now. And the people of Quebec have elected 54 MPs from Bloc Québecois, not on a promise that we will try to have Ottawa manage its things properly, but on the very fact that we were promoting sovereignty for Quebec. And sovereignty for Quebec in the 70s was an emotional thing. In the 19s, we're exactly like you, we're tightening our belts. I should sometimes tighten mine a little bit more. So we feel the economic crunch. And in the 90s, the sovereignty issue is an economic issue. It's economic survival for Quebec. We have a great potential. We don't want it to be scrapped because Ottawa have decided to pay us UI so we keep quiet. That's not enough for us. Our agenda, in the next June probably, there will be a provincial election. On one side, the Liberals with Mr. Johnson, who replaced Mr. Bourassa. On the other side, Mr. Parizeau from the Parti Québécois with a sovereignty agenda. We strongly believe that Mr. Parizeau will form the next Quebec government. His next move will be within 2 years to hold a referendum and ask the population of Quebec with a very simple, clear question: do you want sovereignty or not? A yes or a no. We believe we will have a yes. At that very moment, negotiations will have to start with the rest of Canada on how to operation that. It's not the next morning that you'll have barriers or whatsoever or customs around Quebec. We are a civilized country, and all this will have to go through a respectful process. But negotiations will have to start. It will certainly take more than a few months. We're probably talking about a few years before everything settles into place. Furthermore, there's no question about trying to divide Canada into two parts, the eastern provinces and the rest of it. Of course, there must be a way to link all this together. So Quebec will certainly remain a territory entirely accessible to everyone. This is the only way we can hold together and protect what we have good from coast to coast. But at the same time, we want to get rid of what we have that is not so good from coast to coast, and that is mainly our federal government. It is a system that doesn't work. Any corporation that would be driven like Canada is being conducted would be at least $500 billion into debts. And mind you, that's exactly where we are. We have to get rid of that old system. Doesn't work. My friend Jim Gouk believes that they can reform the system. And this is a valid option. We believe in Quebec that all that could be tried has been tried to do that, and there's no way the system can be reformed. It's a dinosaur. It has to go extinct, and we have to replace it by a new system of some kind that will have to be negotiated between all concerned parties. When you see a system that goes through Meech Lake and through Charlottetown, and with tremendous efforts from people that are dedicated to find a solution. I think Mr. Mulroney did his best to find a solution. I remember seeing all the premiers on TV that evening. They were signing the Meech Accord in Ottawa, and how emotional the thing was. These people were exhausted by all the stress they went through into those negotiations. They really thought they had it all wrapped up. No loose ends. Well, there was one loose end. When you have a system where people, with their best of their intents, cannot change the system itself, you have a system that cannot evolve. We believe the federal system is unable to evolve in whatever direction. So we wish good luck to the reformers to try to change it, but we believe everything that could be tried has been tried, and now we want to try something else. Mind you, the sovereignty issue might not just be a good thing for Quebec. It certainly, in our point of view, is a good thing for the rest of Canada, because it will force a restructuration of some kind, and it will force to get rid of that whole system. Sovereignty might not just be good for Quebec, it might be good for other parts of Canada too. I'm open to your questions right now. I understand some of you people will have to leave between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. When you think that will be enough, I'm sure your president here will signal me, and we will stop answering questions. But meanwhile, feel free to ask any questions you see fit. Who will break the ice? You're second. The ladies are first today.
A couple questions. I would like to be clear, have you be clear with us when you say sovereignty, exactly what sovereignty means, so that we're using that word in the same way. Secondly, as you describe the sort of economic problems that Quebec has with the central government, as I listen to that, I think, gee, that's no different than BC. We also would rather have more control over our training programs, over how that, the transfer payments happen and what we do with that money and how much we get. Why is it different for Quebec? And I'm really surprised to not hear you talk about cultural matters and language and the integrity of your nation. But to describe it only in economic terms makes me think it's no different for us in BC, that we would like to have more of those powers also within the Federation.
Okay, let me answer your second question here. Culturally speaking, we have gained tremendous control over all aspects of our culture. Well, you know Celine Dion, I'm sure. She's one of our artists that has decided to expand on the Anglophone side of the market. But we have tens like hers that did expand on the French side of the market, going into all the French-speaking countries and that are well known worldwide. On the language issue, I mean, everything in Quebec is in French nowadays. We even were able to kind of backtrack on this sign law thing because we have accomplished with our aim in that matter. So culturally speaking, we are strong. We're probably more strong culturally than the rest of Canada is because by the fact that you do speak English, you're heavily, there's a potential to be heavily influenced by the American culture. The American culture can penetrate you very easily, not so in Quebec, because most people don't speak that much English nor have any opportunity to do so. So on the cultural side, of course there's an issue. Of course we have a cultural identity. Of course we feel Quebecers and our identity is very, very strong. But, I mean, that is behind us now. What's ahead of us is now to realize ourselves, economically speaking, as a society. And that's why in the 90s, that's the issue we're addressing now. Now, you're saying our concerns are very similar to yours, not to say identical. Of course, we're looking at the same object. The federal system doesn't work. So our diagnostic is identical. It's the cure that on which we differ. Why is that? I don't know since how many years British Columbians have been examining this issue and trying to find a solution. We've been trying to do that for, well, I've been in this world for a little bit more than 50 years now, and as far as I can remember, that has been a precious issue. Prior to that, in the early part of the century, that was an issue too in Quebec. So we've been looking at the problem and trying to find solutions for decades and decades and decades. And until the Meech Lake and Charlottetown Accords that didn't pass the mark, when I say we, I'm not talking for myself necessarily, but for the population of Quebec, we Quebecers had a feeling it could be managed, but not so anymore. Not so anymore. So we share a identical or very similar point of view on what the problem is, but our path has driven us to a point that we don't believe that your cure will work. We've tried it. But Mr. Gouk has a different point of view, which I do respect. We simply don't share it anymore. And your first question, what is sovereignty? Sovereignty is having the control over what's going on in your territory in a political sense, in a legal sense. So you can decide of your own agenda. You don't have to wait for someone else to decide in your place. curiously enough, we're one of the few countries who need 2 MPs per capita to represent us, one in Ottawa, one at the provincial level. As far as I'm concerned, that's 1 MP too many, and we could salvage that salary. Sorry for you, Jim.
Be fine with me when it happens.
There's redundancy here, and not only there's redundancy, every time we put a question forward into the House, you have to a minister, you have always to assess, are we addressing a federal issue or a provincial concern? And you have to carefully aim your question at addressing a federal issue, not a provincial one, because the minister will say, hey, that's not my problem. Now at the National Assembly in Quebec, they have exactly the same problem in the opposite direction, because the minister there could answer, hey, that's not provincial concern, it's because of the federal people. Immigration-wise, we are experiencing since the last 3 weeks a problem with a specific family that will or might be thrown back to Romania. And the province of Quebec, Mr. Chachia, the Minister for Immigration in Quebec, says, well, it's okay with me, but it has to be okay with Ottawa. And Ottawa says, well, it's okay with us, but it has to be okay with Quebec. That lasted for 2 weeks. Then they say, oh, they said it's okay. Oh, they said it's okay. Now, 2 weeks after the fact, it's okay. Now, how do we manage that? Well, we're lacking time, because in 1 week from now, they have to be deported, and we won't have time to do it within 1 week. Now, what kind of an answer is that? You're just throwing the ball to one another. You're business people. Will you put responsible for a specific task 2 persons? No, 1 person is responsible, is accountable for. Every time you would put 2 persons accountable for a specific task, you know no one will be responsible. It will be always the fault of the other. And that's what we're experiencing in this country. And that is why Quebec wants to gather all its power. That is sovereignty, being sovereign, the power to decide, not the power not to decide like we're experiencing in this country nowadays. I've answered your question right?
Well, is sovereignty the same as independence then, I guess? Can you be sovereign within that?
Sovereignty, independence, separation, all 3 words describing particular aspect of the same object. I mean, to be sovereign, you have to declare your independence, kind of. Now, beware, being independent in that sense doesn't mean we just pull back on ourselves and we don't talk to the other people. We know this is a global market and we're all interdependent. But, I mean, the states are a sovereign country, they're an independent country, and they are doing tremendous business all over the world. So Quebec, with this aspect of sovereignty, wants to do business all over the world. And you will remember on the free trade agreement, there was not that much support in the rest of Canada, but Quebec was strongly behind it. Same for NAFTA. We are people who believe in world trade.
Okay, Pierre, just before you go on, maybe if I could just, I want to make sure we don't have one misconception here that's coming. First, to address your concern, the old watchword was when they were talking separation, and then in came the new term of sovereignty association, which had an entirely different meaning to us at that time. Lucien Bouchard, at a meeting that I was at, made it very clear that the question of separation in Quebec is just that. It is separation. What associations develop after that will be part of the negotiated process. But what Quebecers will vote on is independence, yes or no, period. So the old question of sovereignty association has been set aside, and that is not what is on the plate. Just to deal with the economic issues that Pierre talks about, and you were saying the common problem we have here in BC, which is true. We feel that there's a real problem. It may be why a very, very large majority of MPs sent back from the western part of Canada are from a new party that believes the same thing as Quebec, that there's serious problems in Ottawa. Where we differ is we believe something can be done about it. And Pierre has mentioned the fact that, you know, we've had governments in the past say, hey, we're going to fix it, trust us, don't worry about it, we know there's a problem and we're going to fix it, and then they never did. And their rationale in Quebec is that because it can never be fixed before, it can never be fixed now. But the difference is, if there's been an extreme shortage of orange juice in this country, nobody's seen an orange for years and years and years, and I stand up here before you and say, I'm going to have this glass filled up with orange juice, and nobody's seen an orange in so long, and people have said it before and the glasses never got filled, chances are you're not going to believe I'm going to fill it neither. But if I say I'm going to fill this glass with orange juice, and the way I am going to do it is I have some friends that went down to Florida, and one of them managed to smuggle back an orange, and they have promised me one wedge out of it. So I am going to take that wedge and squeeze it and put it in this glass. Now I have another friend that had some concentrate that they have saved for ages, and they promised me a half a glassful, so that's going to bring it up to here. Now I have been growing from a seed a special orange with all kinds of special lights and everything at home, and it has an orange growing on it, and I'm going to use the juice out of that orange to fill the balance of the glass. Now it is just possible that after a long time of people promising to fill this glass and not being able to do it, you might just believe that I have found a way to fill this glass, if in fact that were important to all of us. So where the difference is between our party and all those that have gone before is all the others have said, we're going to fill the glass. We're going to solve the economic problems of this country. We're going to change the way we do business. That's all they said. We never were told how. We were never told how they were going to address the deficit, what they were going to do about the debt, what they were going to do about the political process in this country. That's where we differ. We have said we're going to end the deficit, and here is in detail how we're going to do it. Here's the changes we're going to make. Here's the changes to the way we're going to operate Parliament and the government. So what I have said to Pierre is perhaps Quebec at this point, if your problems truly are economic, maybe you're premature. Maybe there is something that is really different. We have the same problems in the West. We in the West believe that we can fix it. So that is our message to Quebec. Hang in there. We've even suggested to Pierre that maybe he's a little more of a reformer than he is a Bloc Quebecois, and he should think about that. Anyway, back to you, Pierre.
I have this lady, those two gentlemen afterwards.
I was born in Quebec, so I'm a native.
Where were you born?
Quebec City, but my family has been in West-Revelstoke since 1850s. Just curious.
That's my writing, you know.
Yes, I know. And one of my other ancestors in Quebec in 1790, John Nielsen, came out, went with Papillon to London 3 different times to represent the French-Canadian interests. He married a French woman. I'm wondering if I need a passport to go back to Quebec.
Good question. Well, first, I'm amazed how small a world. Port-Neuf Station, there's Port-Neuf Station and there's Port-Neuf town. Port-Neuf Station is up the hill a little bit, over the CN railway track, and Port-Neufville down on the St. Lawrence River side. How long have you left?
A long time.
A long time? Okay, well, I hope you'll come back and without a passport. As Jim mentioned earlier, and I will keep Jim with me, maybe even in Quebec, he explains it so well. The day after a yes vote for sovereignty, things won't change just like that overnight. Negotiations will have to be opened with the federal government, with other concerned parties, to see how we manage a transition. And certainly one thing we will want to evitate is having a passport issue. Probably many amongst you have been to Europe. You know, with their common market over there, you can cross borders. I mean, a Frenchman or French woman can cross border to Germany. They don't show the passport. They don't even stop at the border. They're just invited to go faster and faster. I know because I exchanged house with a couple from Alsatia at one time for a full month. They had my house and my car. I had their house and their car. And since I had that license plate, I literally had to stop over at customs to have my passport stamped if I wanted any souvenir. We don't want to invent barriers between us. On the very contrary, we believe that with the sovereign Quebec, we will have less barriers that we're experiencing right now with the rest of Canada. Give you an example. I can go to the States, buy some liquor, some beer, come back to Canada, and if I exceed the allowable limit, I just have to declare it and pay whatever customs taxes they are to be paid, and this is entirely legal. Now, if I go to Ontario or here in BC, and I buy a can of beer or a bottle of wine and want to bring it back to Quebec, of course, no one will probably look at what I'm doing, but this is illegal. And there's no way, no paper form, no nothing I can do to render it legal. It is illegal per se. Matter of fact, and it has happened, if there's a liquor strike in Quebec, in Ontario, or in New Brunswick, and you have people getting into the other province to make a provision, then you'll have policemen in their car at the borderline there, looking at the cars, not Quebec, I mean, let's say New Brunswick, it happened. New Brunswick was on strike, they went into Quebec, bought some liquor, went back to New Brunswick. On the very border of New Brunswick, on the New Brunswick side, policemen were there, and if the trunks was a little bit low, they would stop the car, investigate what's going on, and seize everything. There's no way it can be made legal. We have very stiff economical barriers between the provinces. You know why we have so many little breweries in Canada? Because a beer to be sold in a province must be brewed in that province. Now that is why we're not competitive with the States. We have small, not, how could I say that, not profitable breweries, except for the fact that they hire the prices of the beer they're selling us. And that is why we have to review our act with NAFTA. Those trade barriers are to go down. The oil problem. There's a river that separates Ontario from Quebec. It's called the Outaouais River. Flows through between Hull and Ottawa. It's also called the Borden Line. Now, west of the Borden Line, gasoline costs 10 cents less than east of the Borden Line. Why is that? Federal diktat. Do you think we appreciate that? Not at all. Sovereignty is about that. And do we need passport? For God's sake, let's get those barriers down. We don't want to put to put more, but to have less. I had a question over there and over here, and after you, sir.
My biggest concern listening to this is, I don't think it's ever, I haven't heard an answer for it, is the national debt. If you become a sovereign nation, are you going to take responsibility for your part of the national debt?
Of course. Of course. And that has always been very clear. Now, what would be the fair amount? Well, I don't know how many accountants there are here, but you people work with accountants, and you know that they all have their particular opinion. So the fair amount will have to be negotiated, but the principle is very real, and probably the fair amount will be somewhere on a per capita basis. Do I answer your question very clearly on that account?
No.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be easier just for you to declare bankruptcy?
And start under a new name, Quebec Inc.? I'll tell you why I've entered politics. And you're hitting exactly the hot button there. I had a successful business, but what is the use of having a successful business if this country is going to be bankrupt in 5 or 6 years or 7 years from now? Actually, with the current debt, where each of us, federally speaking, is owing something like $16,500. Well, that's a fair amount of money, but if you go to your friendly banker and say you want to consolidate your debts, he'll probably say, well, we can manage that over a few years, and yes, it's doable. Now, at the current rate of interest, this debt will double in 6 or 7 years. Now, we're well over 30,000 at that point. And your friendly bank manager will probably say, go bankrupt. I'm not talking about Quebec, I'm talking about Canada coast to coast. So our horizon, this is my belief, is between 3 to 5 years to clean our act. Otherwise, we will be completely bankrupt. The World Bank will get in, and we will be treated like a third world country. And no one wants that. Now, what about the sovereignty issue in all this? Well, I've been paying my good tax money, as you have been doing, to Ottawa for many, many years. I remember in '83, I voted Mr. Mulroney. Could you believe that? I'm a good guy. I voted Mr. Mulroney because he told us we will address the deficit issue, we will address the debt issue, and at that moment we were 85 billion into the red. What a small number compared to today. And he didn't. But at that time I accepted to see my tax hired. Mine's empty too. I accepted to see my tax hired to pay more money, and I know many people accepted that on the promise that would give us a clean slate, which it didn't. I mean, I feel we have been robbed by the federal government. We gave money for a specific purpose, it wasn't used for that purpose, and now we're deeper into debt. Now, Quebec, historically speaking, for many decades, have proven a capacity to better manage its public finance, better than Ottawa. We're doing a good job in Quebec. We're having our problems, but we're doing a good job. I'd rather give my money to Quebec and have Quebec pay our fair share of the debt. Now we will get out of it. It's nearer me. They're nearer the field, and I have more confidence we can address this debt issue. So sovereignty is not about going bankrupt, but about evitating to go bankrupt. Evitating, is that a word? Yeah. What would be the, who speaks French?
Avoiding.
Avoiding. Wonderful. Vous parlez français? Avoiding to go bankrupt. This is the issue, and it might, mind you, be a good thing for the whole of Canada because it will force to address the issue head on. I had another question from you and then from you, and then I'll go over there. Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned that Quebec puts 28 billion into the federal government and takes approximately that amount out.
Yes.
I think there's often been some contradictory figures that we in Western Canada feel that there's probably more being given back to Quebec than they're putting in. And why that is, I guess it goes back to some formula dated back to 1967, where Quebec has been known to be a have-not province at this point. Other three provinces have been capped. And I think if there's one thing that alienates me, along with a few other Westerners, or many other Westerners, is that at least it's our thinking that we're always giving and not getting as much back. I have been to Quebec on 2 or 3 occasions. I find it to be a very skilled and educated population. I see it a land much like Ontario with resources, and could never really understand why it was to be considered a have-not province, and right across this imaginary border is Ontario, it is a half province.
Right on. I don't understand it either. Sovereignty might be a way to answer that specific concern, among others. The 28 billion figure is 1967. In the 70s, Quebec was giving to Ottawa more than it was receiving. And that was part of the platform of René Lévesque in the 76. We were one of the have province. In the 80s, with the recession, we went into not the have-not province, but not the have province. We've leveled 28 billions. And the figures, when they are saying we're giving Quebec 3 billions in transfer payment, that's nice. So many billions in equalization payment, that's nice. But let's add up all the figures, not just look at some specific. All the figures being added up, that makes 28 billions. So really what they're giving us is what we've been giving them. Not a penny more, not a penny less, but it's not presented in that fashion. It's presented as if we were receiving something. We're receiving the money we gave from one pocket and we're putting it in the other. Basically, that's it. Now, there's one other issue I want to point out, because you may see the figure. At one point during the last campaign, Mr. Loisel mentioned in Quebec City, we're giving Quebec 34 billions, not 28. So we scratched it a little bit and we found out where this extra 6 billion came from. They're not giving it to us in services or in goods. It's our part of the increase of the debt. Have a good day, sir. It's our part of the increase of the debt. So I mean, everyone in Canada actually is receiving from coast to coast, that last year 45 billions more than you put in. Let's look at the financial statements for the government, the public accounts. Canadians on one side are giving to Canada 120 billion a year in tax money. On the other side, Canada is providing services through programs for 120 billion. So it's a balanced act. The deficit solely comes from the interest on the debt. We haven't been paying a penny on the debt since 1983. And that is why the debt is growing. The deficit is essentially compounded interest, nothing else. It's not money spent for programs, it's essentially that debt we don't pay. So if you ever hear someone say 1/3 of your tax money goes for the service of the debt, that's false. 0% goes for the service of the debt. We don't service it. We don't service it. We just add upon it, and we're now over 500 billions. So essentially, Quebec is putting 28 billions, receiving 28 billions, and it has over that its share of the national debt, as everyone else does. Have I answered your question?
Well, you have, but I think that there has always been contradictory figures between what Quebec has always been a believer that what we have put in, we have taken out. I think most other Canadian provinces feel differently. They feel that there is still quite an inequity of what they're putting in and what they're taking out.
You're putting more money than you're receiving.
Correct.
BC is one case.
Yeah.
We are not putting more money than we're receiving, and we're not putting less money than we're receiving. We are just on level. Some other provinces are on the other side. They're receiving more money than they're putting in. But I'm trying to put the figures back into shape with the complete picture. Yes, Jim?
Yeah, there's one small discrepancy here, and it might explain part of what you're inquiring about, Gary. Quebec puts 28 billion in, as Pierre says, and gets 28 billion back in direct payments, whether it be UIC, equalization payments, transfers for national health care, post-secondary education, and so on. What does not enter into Pierre's equation, and I'll stand to be corrected, and I'm sure he would love to correct me, is things like when the money goes back in for UIC, that does not include the salaries of the people that are in Quebec that are federal government employees who operate the Unemployment Insurance Commission. It does not include the $33 million a year spent keeping the St. Lawrence Seaway open for the Port of Montreal and for flood control along the St. Lawrence in the eastern townships of Quebec because of problems from the ice flow. And there's a number of things like that. So what happens, obviously, if Ottawa, aside from the debt and the interest payment, if they get 120 billion in and they spend 120 billion, some of that is spent on the national infrastructure that is not a payment to a specific province. So if Quebec gets 28 billion back specifically, then they are in effect getting more in Quebec, spent in Quebec or on Quebec, than that $28 billion. So that's where the inequity is.
And you told me I could correct you?
Yes, go ahead.
Let me correct you. You're wrong. It's very easy to calculate all those salaries if you look on the salary side, because we have our own Ministry of Revenue, right? And everyone who is residing in Quebec, wherever he's working, everyone who's residing in Quebec must pay his Quebec income tax. So we have a clear-cut figure on how much salaries are paid and by whom. All that has been accounted for. That 28 billion figure has been arrived at after the Meech Lake Accord. There was a group that was set up to study exactly what was going to Ottawa and what was coming back. And every little thing that we could think of was taken into account, and given a few millions one way or the other, we arrived at that 28 balance figure, billions balance figure. Yeah. So I disagree.
Once again, we agree to disagree.
Well, actually, it's figures, and all those studies have been made. I didn't do them myself, but I've read those, and they are reliable sources. The studies have been made not by Mr. Parisot's group, but by Mr. Bourassa people. So they must be reliable. The truth could be even more interesting. If you allow me, sir, I'll get to this gentleman and back to you after, if you allow me.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised at all the slow pitches you've been getting so far. And one of the things that I think you're the first one that I've really heard that's saying that Quebec is getting equal back of what they're putting in. I think any figures that I've ever seen and any politicians that I've ever heard speak knows that Quebec gets more. And I don't want to argue the point with you, I think is probably part of the misinformation you're giving your own people in Quebec. And that's probably what they don't understand. I think if the truth were known, and if they knew the truth, you'd probably have a different feeling back there. The thing that I want to ask you is, why 2 years? I mean, right now, the thing that Quebec is doing is upsetting our dollar, and you're threatening to separate, and you say you're going to take 2 years to do it. As far as I'm concerned, you're having an election in Quebec pretty soon. Let's get on with it. Let's get that referendum going, and then if you decide to vote against staying in Canada, then get out. We got to finish this. And do it now. Do it this year. You should have an election within the next 3 or 4 months. Have your election, have your referendum. If it goes to get out, then get out. And Jim, you were saying there's ways that you can fit them in. We can't, especially if we close our walls. We've got to face the fact this has been going on too long. We've got to get over all this finagling. Let them have the referendum and see which way it goes. Don't try to convince them. Don't just stay out of it. Let them go their own way and let them have that vote, and let's decide it once and for all. As far as I'm concerned, and with all due respect, sir, we're better off without it.
I cannot disagree with you. Actually, Mr. Bouchard in the House said, in answer to the throne speech, was on the third day of the session, that was on the 20th of January, the problem with Canada is Quebec. And the problem with Quebec is Canada. We probably could be the best friends in the world if we were separate. Unfortunately, we are in a system that kind of, I don't say it is willfully, but puts us each one against the other. And that is not of any use to you, nor is it to us. I think you are a very reasonable person. I think that you are certainly a generous and open-hearted person. And still, you said things that are rather strong a few moments ago. And this is because you feel it that way. And I respect that. You have the right to feel it that way, and I even think I understand why you are thinking that way, because in the province of Quebec, I have people who would take an exactly similar stance in the opposite direction with the same emotion and the same conviction. Why are reasonable, good people, honest men and women, seeing each other as, I don't know if I have the right word, an enemy? We're not enemies anyway, but let's use that word. It's because the system is not servicing our interest right. And yes, we want to be out. Yes, we think we can do better on our own. And yes, we want to remain an open society and be able to correspond, to exchange with the rest of the world, and especially with the people in Canada.
Yeah, but why wait 2 years?
That's the other concern. I'm not at Mr. Parizeau's place. There are talks actually in province of Quebec to use this for re-election as the referendum platform at the same moment. That will be a political decision, and the Bloc Québécois and the Parti Québécois are two different units, so I don't have a word to say in the Parti Québécois. I won't be able to influence them, but that issue is in Quebec itself being addressed on those terms actually. Why wait two years? I won't be the one who will resolve it, but if I had to take the decision myself, mind you, I would agree with you. Let's do it now and get over with it, because it is stressing everyone, and hopefully when we'll be over with it, we can address our future with a more open-minded perspective and see some solutions ahead of us, rather than steer in this kind of mixture that no one likes to be in. If you allow me, I'll ask this gentleman. But thank you for your question, and I'm not trying to convince you, just to convey information. You have enough wisdom to take.
Well, you're quite certain in your in your ideas, and at the same time, we would like to get on with the world. We would like to get on with our lives and get this behind us, and yet all we ever hear, we've gone through about 5 years of this.
You know what? You would be speaking French and being sitting in Portneuf Station, and I wouldn't be surprised of hearing those same words. That's how it is. I'm just conveying information, I'm not judging.
I hope you take it back to your people that we got to finish this, get out of it, have your referendum, and then maybe we can get on with our country.
I will invite Jim, and he probably will be able to repeat the various thoughts that were expressed while I was here. I'll go to this gentleman, and then I'll go back over there.
You say that you pay in $28 billion, you get Quebec this $28 billion back. I think that's part of the problem. If you are indeed getting $28 billion back into Quebec, then indeed Quebec, with its large population, percentage-wise of Canada, is not carrying its fair share of Canada's other expenses that do not relate directly to a province, or do not go directly to the province, such as foreign affairs, such as foreign aid, such as defense. Have you calculated, and I guess this is why I'm I was quite surprised to say that you would do better economically, because I believe that if you were to be a sovereign nation and be responsible for those costs that you are not now carrying, that indeed your taxation system would go up considerably. It would have to carry these other costs that are now being borne by the rest of Canada.
Thank you for that question, because it will give me the opportunity to make here a couple of points. First, we already have in Quebec a full set of ministries, including external affairs, to carry on those duties. So we're duplicating many things that are being done in Ottawa with our own money, for one thing. For the second thing, 28 billions, proportionally speaking, we have approximately a quarter of the population, and we're paying approximately a quarter of the revenues of Ottawa. So basically, I think we're paying our share. The money you're mentioning, we're not paying our share of foreign aid and so on and so forth. Let's have a look at how foreign aid is given to other countries. Many times, most of the time, foreign aid is with a rubber band. We will give you credit for $30 million, providing you buy the goods in Canada, either Montreal, Toronto, or Vancouver, or whatsoever. So foreign aid is again distributed across Canada in that fashion. So we are paying our fair share.
But not really. A lot of that foreign aid is coming back into places such as Montreal, such as Bombardier, and so on. It is not coming. The province of British Columbia gets, about 3 or 4%. Although we have 12% of the population, we get about 3 or 4%. A lot of that foreign aid is going back into Quebec because of your manufacturing and so on.
I'm not going to argue for your case, but I reckon the fact that you're right. Mind you, the province who is getting the most is Ontario at this moment, as you probably know as well as I do. So on that basis, again, I repeat, Quebec is paying its fair share and receiving a share, but not in a fair manner, because we're receiving much of that money in UI rather than in contracts, for instance, for foreign aid contracts or whatsoever. We're not getting the same quality of money as we're putting in. I had a question over there, sir.
Just a quick question, brief comment first. I tend to agree with you. The current structure of Canada cannot survive. It's unique among nations of the world. In other words, the balance of payments and so on. It's wrong. It isn't going to work. It isn't working now. My question really is a very simple one. Would Quebec propose to secede from Canada on its historic boundaries, or would it include the Ngava and those areas in the north that were added to it, I believe, in 1912?
Well, you're not the first one to ask this question, and as I mentioned in my opening speech, the boundaries of Quebec at the beginning was North America. But it kind of restrained, and if you go on that basis, prior to us, the Aboriginals were here. And, I mean, we can argue on any older boundaries. The point is, we are in 1994. Where are the boundaries of Quebec right now? And what is, or what are the international laws that usually operate in these things? The boundaries of a country or a part of a country at the moment you're talking. You're not going backward. If we wanted to go backward, then we could go back in the 20s when the British Crown gave part of province of Quebec, namely Labrador, to Newfoundland without asking us. We are not arguing this nowadays, although some people, I've heard, would like us to re-annex Labrador, but I mean, this is not in the picture at all. The picture at this moment are the actual boundaries of Quebec. That is what the international law says.
A quick follow-up to that.
Yeah,
what about the wishes of the people who live within that area? Because I understand the Aboriginal and the population of the northern parts of Quebec are very much against becoming part of sovereign Quebec. Is there not an argument that their wishes should be respected?
Some people in the northern part, namely some Crees, have argued that thing, but this is not the agreement, the signed agreement they have with province of Quebec. In other words, there could be dissents among themselves, but basically, as a whole, they have not expressed that, that thought, but have signed an agreement to the opposite. And even then, there are thousands of Indian bands across Canada, and all of them have their specific needs, agendas, treaties, name them. Centuries ago, our common ancestors, on their side, on our side, signed treaties that were thought to be beneficial at that moment. But nowadays, couple of centuries after the fact, these treaties must be updated, and they will have to be dealt with band per band. In province of Quebec, we have tens of bands, and most of them are on agreeable terms with province of Quebec's stance toward the Indians. By the way, since René Lévesque, there's a consensus that the Indians should be recognized their autonomy in the way that they will see fit. And it's not because some Indian band would say the island of Montreal used to be ours that they really want to manage island of Montreal. There should be another treaty or agreement that would give them adequate compensation that would be suitable for this century, the end of the century and the next century. So we're very open toward the autochtons. I had another question over there. I'll be back to you, sir.
It's clear to me that Canada can't survive without Quebec, and Quebec can't survive without Canada. How does your party or your platform intend to address the financing of your portion of the debt, no matter what it is? Because as I understand it, the province of Quebec is the fourth biggest borrower in the nation. And are you going to have the same currency as us? And where are you going to go? Which foreign country are you going to go to, if you will, internationally, to pay Canada your portion? Because the way Canada is right now, we're borrowing heavily internationally, and we're able to do that because we are a nation. And if we get separated, those foreign countries will not have the confidence in our nation to loan us the money.
You've been listening to the news lately, and you know the loonie is on the down curve. Apparently, they're not waiting for Quebec. Matter of fact, it's the American interest rate hike that has put the pressure on the loonie, because, of course, 40% of our debt is financed to other countries. Now, you say, how are you going to pay back Canada? We're not going to pay back Canada. We're going to pay back the lenders, because it's not Canada's money, it is the lenders' money. Now, 60% of the borrowed money comes from Canada as a whole, and we have someone here from the investors group, and they are in province of Quebec, and of course they are collecting RRSP's money from Quebecers and certainly part of that money is not only in shares, but in obligations, and probably Canadian obligations, bonds, right? So the issue is exactly the same. I owe, as a Canadian, $16,500, and all other Canadians are owing that amount of money for the debt, the national debt. When I'm in Quebec, I still owe the same amount of money, and to the same people. And this time I intend to pay it, because actually we're not paying it. So we are not in a situation that we have a solution with Canada. We are in a situation that with Canada we don't have a solution. On the very contrary, we're going to be bankrupt. We have to do something. This is why I entered politics. If that wasn't the cause, I would still be doing good business. Now, how are we going to trade internationally? We already are doing this. We have big trade partners on the south of the border of Quebec with the New England states and the state of New York. We are doing business with Mexico. We're doing business the world over. In my specific writing, we have several industries that are selling worldwide, Canada-wide and worldwide. We intend to go on business as usual. This will have to be negotiated. On the other end, we're doing a lot of business with Ontario, and Ontario is doing a lot of business with Quebec. But Ontario is doing 20% more business with Quebec than Quebec is with Ontario. So what will happen when we will open negotiations? Do you think the Ontarians will say, hey, we want to stop doing business with you and lay off more people than you'll do? No, I mean, this is not our common interest. Rational human beings will negotiate on the basis of their common interest. If we cannot supply something at a reasonable cost, at a better cost than other suppliers, get it from somewhere else. Don't buy it from us. But if we can have a good deal for you, your interest is to do business with us. So let's keep doing, as it is now, by the way, as it is now. You won't buy Quebec because it's Quebec. You'll buy Quebec because it's a good deal. Otherwise, you'll buy somewhere else, and that is reasonable. Let's keep it on a business basis, and there's no reason why it shouldn't work.
That's what we thought about the free trade agreement as well. And that certainly isn't working the way it's supposed to.
May I comment on the free trade agreement? That was a wonderful opportunity that was so mismanaged that we suffered a great deal. We knew, Mr. Mulroney knew, and he said it when entering a free trade agreement, that we would have to convert some of our industries, do some retraining, and so on and so forth. We knew exactly where we would be hit by the free trade agreement. What did they put into place to operation the transition? Nothing. Just good luck, people, we're in it now. And that was a problem. It was not because the concept was bad, it was because it was not only mismanaged, completely not managed. And that is one thing Quebec also resent, because we've been hit for that too.
Did you make this last question at the end of the open meeting? If you want to hand it over later, maybe individual questions?
Certainly. So that will be the last question, and the last question is for my friend from the Investors Group. Hey, that's free advertising.
I appreciate that. It's a follow-up to your question, and it's more a comment than a question to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's if Quebec does separate. You're right, we do have the debt, but Quebec is going to have to come up with the money to pay off the people who lent money to Canada, or Canada to pay off the people who lent the money to Canada. So the big concern will be, what will the foreign investors view the potential for lending money to Quebec, as well as what will be their view of lending money to the rest of Canada? We may all end up having to pay a whole lot greater rate of interest if we're perceived to be less credit-worthy as separate nations as opposed to a unified nation. Quebec may in fact have difficulty borrowing that kind of money to pay back the rest of Canada, so Canada can pay back their deficit. It could be very interesting. It could be very expensive as a lesson for both Quebec.
Let's make one quick closing comment regarding future.
You're in the investment business. I am sure that you do realize that Canada is in such a downslope that borrowing money will cost Canada more and more. It has already started very recently. We have a, how do you call that, in décote. Could you translate that for me? When the rate
Bond rating
was lowered. Oh, that mic. Sorry. How does Canada finance the debt? Because it's not on long-term bonds that they're financing this debt, it's on the mid-term and the short-term. So every year they're borrowing money to refund money they had borrowed a year or a couple of years previous to that. And that's how they're financing it. So what will happen is very, very simple. Quebec will borrow money in place or en lieu of Canada to pay the debts that Canada would have to pay anyway. So we're just changing the name on the bond borrower, not on necessarily the bond issuer on one end. On the other end, what's the capacity to repay this debt? At this very moment, and for the past 11 years, we have not even paid the interest, we're borrowing to pay the interest. So any part of this country who would say to the borrowers, we will pay the interest, will certainly be well listened to, and we intend to do that. You say, how is Quebec going to find the money to pay this? Well, Quebec, as the rest of the country, has tightened its belt for the past 10 years trying to give enough money to Ottawa so that debt would be paid. And they haven't done it. And the word is, let's do it now. Quebec could be a heavy borrower, but per capita, I mean, it is 1/4 of the country. So, of course, it is a good borrower. But it has always be up to its obligation. And that's an important point for investors. We are credible. We are credible. Now for the currency, because that question was asked to me. I cannot answer that question, but I can have a few elements of food for thought. The loonie certainly would suffer tremendously if it would lose 1/4 of the population that supports it. And conversely, province of Quebec would have a certain amount of difficulties putting on the market a new currency. So common interest may dictate that we keep the loonie as a common currency, and of course if we do that, then our respective share of the debt will be more easy to refinance on the markets, because the markets will perceive a certain stability, a certain willingness to maintain our economics sound. On the other end, certain countries, even with their own currency, are not circulating it. For instance, Panama. Panama has the Balboa, and the Balboa, by decree, is at par with the US dollar. Do you think you see a Balboa running in the country? Not at all. It's all US currency. So Quebec could also do that. Mind you, Canada could too. But what is our common interest? What is sound business attitude? I believe we will find out to maintain a common currency would be an asset for all of us. And the only issue could be, what is the picture of the person we will see on it? I am available for more questions, but
only for a short period of time, though.
I mean, here in the back.
Yeah. Just one quick comment. I was just wanting to make an announcement that had nothing to do with this, but I couldn't leave the dollar issue aside. And the only thing I would suggest to Pierre and to everyone else, if Quebec does what they think they're going to do, if they get their debt under control, they pay it all off, and they're flourishing, and as Pierre thinks Canada is going to go bankrupt, then I would suggest there is no way that Quebec would want to have their economic system attached to our dollar, which would plummet, obviously, if we went bankrupt. Likewise, I think we're going to get our ship in order, as long as we get the chance, and I think that it's going to be a little more devastating to Quebec than they think economically to separate from Canada, and as a Canadian, there is no way I want my dollar tied to the economic problems that Quebec may have. So I would suggest that we are not going to have that common dollar. Now, we're on a relatively tight schedule. We're going to have to get going. I think they're about to end the formal meeting. We'll stay for a few minutes. But if there is interest, I am prepared to come back here next month. We'll have a public meeting. Certainly we can discuss the Quebec issue and all the information that I've picked up on Ottawa up till now and in the ensuing period between now and the time we have the meeting, as well as a number of other things that I'm sure you'll find just about as controversial. Things like the deficit and a lot of other policies that are coming out of Ottawa or proposed. I'll be glad to come back. We'll have an open forum on that. I'll deal with all your questions. I'll get the information for the people who have questions that I can't answer, and that'll be sometime next month, and if there's interest, we'll certainly set that up and we'll make sure it's well advertised. So thank you very much for coming.
I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for being here this morning, for listening to me, for informing me. I have learned things. Whatever were your questions, this information educates me, and I will bring it back to Quebec and repeat it because it is important that the flow of information be both ways. Thank you very much. Just before leaving, I want to give a little souvenir here. Do you have 2 minutes? Okay. We were to leave.
Yeah.
I understand you are business people, and as business people, well, you probably would be interested in a video on Portneuf. You would. Yes. This is both in English and then in French, and it has been made by the Economic Expansion Society for Portneuf. It will give you an idea of what the country like is and what kind of industries we have. I also have in English, success is in our nature, and when we say nature, we talk nature because we are a rural country for most part of it. And here in French, for tourism. Anyone who wants to see firsthand how we look like, come on. For our president, or chairman. The president is over there. Do you say president or chairman? President. For our president here, a little picture laminated of Portneuf. You may want to look at it now. And here, for you, sir, Portneuf Affaires, which means affaires? Business. Yes. Portneuf business. And you know through where those cups transited? Vancouver port. They come from China. And I have another one here, and I wanted to give it to the person who asked the most challenging question. And who was that? Who asked the most challenging question?
The guy was so big.
You did, sir. So,
Okay. Yeah,
it is my pleasure.
even if it's made in Quebec, I'll accept it.
Well, thank you, Jim, and thank you, Pierre. You certainly spoke eloquently in explaining your position and what you see in the future of Canada. And I want to thank you all for coming this morning, and I want to remind you of our 11:45 luncheon with the president of the BC Hotel Association. Thanks again for coming. Thanks, Pierre. Beautiful.
It's a pleasure.